Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our warriors.
and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent show for you this week. We've got a lot of content to get through. So first, of course, I will be providing the news as I always do. That will be followed by a report from German aid to Ukraine. We will then discuss the Russian International Economic Forum with Stanimir. A lot of developments there. And that will be followed by a discussion from our contributor, Jay, who will talk about some updates regarding trains. Then we'll, of course, answer all of your questions. So if you guys do have any questions during the broadcast, you're welcome to put them in the comments. We'll do our best to get through them at the end. Also, if you could, please do hit the like button and the subscribe button on YouTube. Really helps us out, spreads the word about us. Also, we have a website, Tochnyi.info. We keep a lot of very meticulous records and data, and we publish articles there. So if you guys appreciate what we're doing on the stream, you want more information, more detail, check out that website. A lot of great stuff. We also have a social media account on Twitter and Blue Sky. That's where we post some updates. So yeah, later in the week, we should have a piece of content for you. So if you want to keep updated on all that, subscribe to our social media, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I will now jump into the news.
These are the main headlines as of June 22nd, 2025. First up, we have operations. In the early morning of June 19th, Russia experienced a widespread drone operation that reached several regions, including Volgograd. In response, authorities implemented emergency aviation protocols, which included halting flights and enforcing a temporary closure of Volgograd Airport under the Kovyor contingency plan. The full extent and impact of the incident have yet to be officially confirmed. Volgograd is located roughly 500 kilometers from the front line and contains a variety of key military and defense-related infrastructure. Among these are the Titan Barakati defense manufacturing site, the Marinovka Air Base, known for hosting Su-24 and 34 aircraft, and a significant oil processing facility essential for sustaining fuel supplies to the armed forces. The same refinery was previously the focus of a Ukrainian strike in March. As a result of the latest drone attack, aviation authorities imposed a temporary no-fly zone over Volgograd and Kaluga airports starting around 4 p.m. Kyiv time. The flight suspension measures at Volgograd followed standard emergency procedures used in the event of aerial threats, diverting incoming aircraft and ceasing departures. Local officials acknowledged the incident. The governor of Volgograd stated that air defenses had engaged and allegedly neutralized drones targeting areas within the Kalachivsky and Borodishensky districts, as well as the southern sections of Volgograd. He reported no physical harm to individuals or damage to any infrastructure. However, despite official assurances, online footage circulated widely showing fires believed to be the result of drone impacts or fragments intercepted. One Ukrainian Telegram channel, Exile Nova Plus, shared a video from Volgograd depicting a blaze and a smoke plume. On Saturday, drone activity targeted the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Russia's Republic of Tatarstan, a location known for housing a facility that assembles Shahed series drones based on Iranian designs. Fixed-wing drones were reportedly observed near the towns of Chistopol and Yelabuga, prompting regional authorities to issue a drone alert early in the day. As a safety precaution, aviation control implemented the, quote, carpet protocol at Kazan and Nizhnekamsk airports, suspending all flights in and out of the affected areas due to potential aerial threat. According to statements from Russian officials, the drones involved in the latest incident were intercepted before they could impact production facilities. Nonetheless, fragments from aerial devices fell to the ground, reportedly causing damage to several civilian vehicles in the vicinity. The industrial site at the center of the incident, located in the Alabuga zone, was set up in 2023 as part of a bilateral agreement finalized between Russia and Iranian partners in late 2022. The facility has since become a central hub for assembling both Shahed attack drones and reconnaissance units, with production goals reportedly aiming for around 6,000 units annually. North Korea has committed to sending an additional 6,000 military personnel to Russia, officially to support reconstruction efforts in the Kursk region, as confirmed by Russian officials. This follows earlier deployments during which more than half of an initial 11,000-member North Korean force reportedly did not return, with many involved in frontline engagements against Ukrainian forces. Russian Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu confirmed the new deployment after meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. According to Russian state media, the contingent includes 1,000 military engineers for ordnance removal operations and 5,000 military construction personnel tasked with rebuilding infrastructure damaged during the war. Shoigu described the deployment as part of a broader agreement aimed at expanding bilateral cooperation, particularly in post-conflict recovery efforts in Kursk. He also announced that plans were underway to commemorate the role of North Korean forces in what Russian authorities described as efforts to reclaim Russian territory. Ukraine's main intelligence directorate announced on Wednesday that Mikhailo Hrystai, who served as the deputy mayor in Russian-occupied Berdansk, was confirmed to have passed away. Berdansk is located in the Zaporizhzhia region, which has been under Russian control since the early full-scale invasion. While the official statement did not specify who carried out the action, the newspaper Ukrainska Pravda, citing an unnamed source within the intelligence community, reported that Hrystai was shot during a targeted operation executed by HUR. According to HUR, Hrystai aligned himself with Russian authorities following their takeover of the city in 2022. He was subsequently appointed to a role within the occupation administration. The statement further claimed that he had been misappropriating government assets during his time in that position. Russian authorities have not publicly responded to or confirmed the incident. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has appointed Hennady Shapovalov as the new commander of Ukraine's ground forces, as confirmed by an official decree issued on June 19. Shapovalov previously led Operational Command South until early 2025, after which he took on a diplomatic military role representing Ukraine in NATO's Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine mission based in Germany. This leadership change follows the resignation of Major General Mikhailo Drapati, who stepped down from the same position on June 1st. His resignation came in the wake of a Russian missile attack that struck a Ukrainian military training site, resulting in the deaths of 12 personnel and injury to over 60 others. Drapati cited personal accountability for the incident as the reason behind his decision to leave the post. Despite stepping down from Ground Forces Command, Drapati was appointed 2 days later to lead Ukraine's joint forces. The structure, operating under the General Staff, is tasked with coordinating large-scale military formations during complex operations across different fronts. Up next, we have economy and aid. After the G7 summit in Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a significant expansion of sanctions aimed at weakening Russia's financial and logistical capabilities. The new measures include restrictions on over 200 vessels that have been circumventing the international price cap as part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet, as well as sanctions against more than 70 individuals closely linked to the Kremlin or its interests abroad. The names include high-profile figures from political, economic, and cultural sectors. Among them are Valery Gergiev, a prominent conductor known for his public support of the Russian government, Vladimir Putin's former wife, Lyudmila Ocheretnaya, and her husband, Artur Ocheretny, Mikhail Shelemov, a relative of Putin, and Tatiana Yumasheva, the daughter of former President Boris Yeltsin, along with her husband. The Canadian Foreign Affairs Ministry emphasized that this is one of the country's most extensive sanction announcements since the start of the full-scale invasion. It also represents the largest move to date focused on disrupting Russia's maritime trade infrastructure. Maria Pevchik, the chair of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, noted that all individuals featured on the Canadian list are also part of the List 50, a compilation of figures considered part of Putin's core network, assembled by associates of the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny following his death in Russian prison in February 2024. She pointed out that the order of names in Canada's sanctions list matches that of the original Navalny-aligned list, suggesting a possible deliberate alignment with opposition research. The European Union has decided against implementing a proposed reduction in the price cap of Russian oil exports, primarily due to concerns over global market instability triggered by the escalating conflicts in the Middle East. The plan, which would have lowered the cap from $60 to $45 per barrel, was expected to be reviewed by EU foreign ministers in Brussels, but has been put on hold. According to diplomats cited by Politico, the recent intensification of hostilities between Israel and Iran has introduced significant volatility into global oil markets, making any move to tighten restriction on Russian exports too risky at this time. The decision to pause discussions was also reflected in the recent G7 summit in Canada, where member states collectively agreed not to proceed with the change under current conditions. One diplomatic source explained that oil prices, which had been hovering near the existing cap, are now experiencing erratic fluctuations. This instability has made it politically and economically impractical to implement a stricter price ceiling. The European Commission president acknowledged that while the cap has had a limited impact over time, the recent spike in global oil prices demonstrates that the mechanism still serves a purpose. With the current cap acting as a constraint during rising prices, officials see no urgent need to adjust it further, especially given the geopolitical risks. President Zelensky has enacted a new set of sanctions targeting individuals and organizations linked to Russia's drone development programs and efforts to evade international trade restrictions. The decree was published on June 20th and follows a decision by Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council. The decree lists 56 Russian nationals and 55 companies involved in various aspects of unmanned aerial vehicle development and supply chains. These entities are associated with the production of drones such as Gore, Orlan 10, Supercam, and FPV variants. Specific companies cited include those supplying components to Alabuga Machinery LLC, as well as importers supporting Kronstadt Joint Stock Company, a key Russian UAV manufacturer involved in the production of the Banderol class system. While most of the sanctioned entities are based in Russia, the list also includes 6 companies registered in China and 1 in Belarus, all identified as being part of supply networks aiding the Russian defense sector. The sanction package includes a broad set of measures: asset freezes, restriction on financial operations, bans on capital transfers, revocation of licenses, and other regulatory constraints. Implementation responsibilities are distributed among various Ukrainian authorities, including the cabinet of ministers, security services, the National Bank, and other designated agencies. Ukraine's energy minister, Herman Halushenko, informed parliament that the country will be required to import at least 4.6 billion cubic meters of natural gas in 2025 due to damage sustained by domestic gas production infrastructure in recent Russian attacks. Speaking during a parliamentary Q&A session, Halushenko emphasized that the strikes have significantly disrupted Ukraine's ability to meet its internal gas needs through domestic extraction. Out of the total volume required, 2.9 billion cubic meters has already been secured through existing contracts, with financing confirmed. According to the minister, the remaining supply will need to be sourced and funded over the course of the year to ensure stable energy availability. Satellite imagery and open-source intelligence indicate that Russia is expanding its Shahed drone production capabilities at the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan. According to the open-source monitoring group Dnipro OSINT, recent construction spans approximately 1.39 square kilometers. Much of this new development appears to be dormitory housing intended to accommodate an expanded labor force, including students, migrant workers from Tajikistan, and individuals from mixed ethnic backgrounds. That's a weird mainstream media report way of saying that they're human trafficking mostly Africans in to do this work, brought in to support increasing drone output. The Alabuga site, located in the city of Yelabuga, is about 1,200 kilometers from the front lines and has become the focal point of Russia's domestic Shahed 136 manufacturing since 2023. These drones, locally rebranded as the Garon 2, have become a mainstay of Russia's long-range strike capacity. Despite Ukrainian efforts to disrupt production, including the first known strike in April of 2024 and additional attempts since, no sustained operational damage to the facility has been confirmed. Analysis from the International Institute for Strategic Studies shows that the physical footprint of the Yelabuga production complex has doubled since 2023. 5 new structures have been identified on site, including facilities with shielding against aerial attacks and secured perimeters. The impact of this expanded manufacturing capacity is reflected in the volume of drone deployments. As of mid-2024, Russia was launching approximately 500 Shahed-type drones per month. That figure has since surged to nearly 4,200 as of March 2025. According to Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, daily output of drones and decoys has reached around 170 units, with plans to push production to 190 per day by the end of the year. The International Atomic Energy Agency, along with Russia's nuclear regulator Rostechnadzor, has concluded that Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant cannot be restarted while the ongoing war continues to pose serious risks to nuclear safety. This conclusion was announced by the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi on June 19th following on-site discussions. Key issues preventing the reactivation of any of the 6 reactors include unresolved challenges with off-site power supply and the availability of cooling water, both of which are essential for safe operations. The plant, which remains in cold shutdown, is currently operating with just 1 external power line out of 10 available before the invasion, leaving its energy supply highly vulnerable. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in 2023 further compromised the cooling infrastructure, requiring reliance on groundwater wells for reactor cooling. Although 10 out of 11 wells remain functional, 1 pump is inoperable and is slated for replacement. It was agreed that any consideration of restarting reactors would require fully resolving cooling and power issues and is considered unrealistic under current wartime conditions. Meanwhile, the IAEA team has been monitoring site maintenance, including safety system checks on Unit 5 and maintenance on Unit 4's main transformer. In contrast to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant's inactive status, maintenance operations are ongoing at other Ukrainian nuclear facilities. At the South Ukraine nuclear power plant, 1 reactor recently returned to full power following refueling and maintenance, while another has entered into its maintenance phase. Refueling continues at a 3rd unit there, and similar scheduled work is underway at one of the reactors at Rivne nuclear power plant. Argentina's intelligence service has identified 5 Russian nationals suspected of conducting covert influence operations aligned with Moscow's strategic objectives, according to a statement by presidential spokesperson Manuel Adorni. The group is accused of attempting to advance Russia's geopolitical interests through a range of non-traditional intelligence activities. Adorni explained that individuals were involved in efforts to shape public opinion and gather political insights. Their activities included creating and distributing content on social media, engaging with local NGOs, conducting focus groups, and collecting information that could potentially be used to benefit Russia's foreign policy goals. 2 individuals were named: Lev Andriashvili, described as the network's leader and key financier, and his wife, Irina Yakovenko. Adorni claims they are affiliated with an organization referred to as, quote, the company, which he linked to Project Lakhta, a Russian influence operation previously associated with the late Yevgeny Prigozhin. According to the Argentine government, the objective of the group was to cultivate a loyal network capable of executing disinformation campaigns and other influence operations targeting Argentina. Adorni did not disclose whether the individuals had been arrested or if they were still in the country. In response, the Russian embassy in Buenos Aires denied any official ties to the individuals named, stating that neither was registered with the consulate. The embassy described the allegations as part of a recurring pattern of, quote, spy mania, and said that it had formally requested clarification from Argentina's foreign ministry. The incident comes months after Russia repatriated 2 intelligence operatives, Artem Dultsev and Anna Dultseva, in a prisoner exchange. The pair had been living in Slovenia under assumed Argentine identities and were convicted of espionage. Their children, who reportedly spoke no Russian, returned with them to Moscow. Petro Porrohenko, the former president of Ukraine and current MP, is challenging sanctions imposed against him by President Zelensky through the National Security and Defense Council. Poroshenko's legal team claims the documents used to justify the February 12th sanctions were falsified after the decision had already been made. arguing that the council could not have reviewed the actual materials at time. He alleges that the documents were retroactively altered while Zelensky was away, and that the State Financial Monitoring Service, which initiated the case, has refused to provide the original submission to the court. Poroshenko linked this to personal bias by the agency's head, Filip Pronin. His lawyers argue that the government failed to comply with court orders to submit key evidence, and that an opinion from Ukraine's representative to the European Court of Human Rights was likely created after the fact and never reviewed by officials. The Supreme Court Judge Mikhailo Smokovich criticized the cabinet ministers for not complying with the court's directive over 1 month after the ruling. The sanctions list also included several other prominent figures, such as Ihor Kolomoisky and Viktor Medvedchuk. Poroshenko's legal team claims that the sanctions lack legal basis under Ukrainian law, asserting that a Ukrainian citizen living in Ukraine cannot be sanctioned domestically under the current framework unless deemed a threat by Ukraine itself, not just by foreign powers. Poroshenko insists that the sanctions were politically motivated and has called for Zelensky's decree to be annulled due to the government's failure to submit the required documentation within the legal 15-day period. The court has been reviewing the case since April. On June 16th, Ukraine and Austria signed 5 cooperation agreements covering security, the return of Ukrainian children taken to Russia, agriculture, reconstruction, and regional collaboration. The agreements were signed by senior officials from both countries and aim to strengthen bilateral ties across multiple sectors. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha and Austria's Federal Minister for European and International Affairs, Beate Maini-Reisinger, signed key documents, including a declaration on political cooperation, a joint communique addressing security issues on the repatriation of children, and a framework for Austria's participation in Ukraine's reconstruction. In the agricultural sector, Ukrainian Minister Vitaly Koval and Austrian Minister Norbert Tochnyi signed a memorandum to expand cooperation in food production, climate protection, and environmental management. Odessa's military administration head and Upper Austria's state governor Thomas Stetzler signed a memorandum focused on supporting the recovery and development of the Odessa region in particular. Another memorandum was signed between representatives of local governance bodies from both countries, promoting deeper municipal and interregional cooperation. Alexander Lukashenko, the self-declared president of Belarus, met in Minsk with Keith Kellogg, the U.S. president's special envoy for Ukraine. The meeting marked the highest-level visit by a U.S. official to Belarus since the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's 2020 visit during Trump's first term. Lukashenko greeted Kellogg warmly, calling him a dear friend, and emphasized the importance of openness during their talks. According to Belarusian state media, the meeting covered global and regional issues, including Belarusian and American relations. Kellogg's visit coincided with the release of 14 political prisoners from Belarus, including opposition figure Sergei Tikhanovsky, the husband of exiled opposition leader Sviatlana Tikhanovskaya. Tikhanovsky, who was jailed in 2021 and sentenced to 18 years, had been detained before the 2020 presidential election, prompting his wife to run in his place. She claimed victory in an election widely regarded as rigged and was forced into exile shortly thereafter. Footage shared by Tikhanovskaya's team showed an emotional reunion, with the couple embracing. She confirmed his release on social media, expressing joy and gratitude toward Donald Trump, Kellogg, and European allies for their role in securing his freedom. She also emphasized that there are still over 1,100 political prisoners in Belarus. The release group includes 5 Belarusian citizens and individuals from Japan, Poland, and Sweden. According to Lithuania's foreign ministry, all 14 are now receiving care in Lithuania. However, not all prominent detainees have been freed. Maria Kolesnikova, a well-known opposition leader jailed after the 2020 protests, remains in prison, as confirmed by her family. Since the 2020 crackdown on mass protests against Lukashenko's rule, tens of thousands have been arrested for political reasons, and hundreds of thousands of Belarusians have fled the country, according to the human rights group Vyasna. Tikhanovskaya continues to lead efforts to pressure Lukashenko's regime from abroad. Russia and Ukraine have completed another prisoner exchange, continuing a series of swaps agreed upon during the peace talks held in Istanbul earlier this month. Both sides confirmed the exchange on Thursday, but did not specify the number of individuals released. The agreement reached on June 2nd includes the planned exchange of 1,000 prisoners of war from each side. President Zelensky announced the return of more Ukrainian soldiers from Russian captivity, sharing images of emotional reunions. According to Ukraine's coordinating body for prisoner exchanges, this particular swap involves soldiers with serious injuries or medical conditions. Russia's defense ministry also confirmed the exchange, releasing photos of its own returning troops wrapped in national flags and celebrating their return. In a related development, the president of Ukraine revealed that during repatriation efforts, Ukraine received 20 bodies falsely identified by Russia as Ukrainian soldiers. Forensic checks showed that these were actually Russian nationals, including one Israeli citizen who had fought for Russian forces and was carrying Israeli identification. Zelensky stated that Russian authorities had been handing over their own dead, sometimes even with Russian passports still on the bodies, apparently without verifying the identities. According to President Zelensky, quote, "This indicates they are either unable or unwilling to properly identify those they repatriate." And last item this week, on June 19th, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that Russia had reached an agreement with Israel to ensure the safety of over 200 Rosatom specialists working at Russia's Bushehr nuclear plant. However, Rosatom chief Alexei Likhachov announced that some staff had already been evacuated and that a complete withdrawal was under consideration. Despite rising regional tensions and Israeli airstrikes elsewhere in Iran, Bushehr remains untouched, largely due to the catastrophic risk of targeting a nuclear facility. The Bushehr plant, built by Russia after the West refused to assist Iran due to proliferation concerns, is officially separate from Iran's uranium enrichment program. Russia supplies the uranium and maintains control over the facility's fuel cycle. Yet experts argue that Iran's true motive for building the plant was to acquire nuclear expertise that could support weapons development, not to meet domestic energy needs, given Iran's significant oil and natural gas reserves. Analysts agree that while Bushehr itself is unlikely to be part of a weapons program, it did provide Iran with critical technical experience. Russia played a major role in brokering the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which aimed to restrict Iran's nuclear program. Under the agreement, Russia was tasked with converting Iran's Fordo enrichment site into a civilian facility. Russia's nuclear cooperation with Iran demonstrates its enduring influence through nuclear technology, even as sanctions weaken other sectors of its economy. While countries like Kazakhstan dominate the raw uranium supply, Russia remains the top global provider of enriched uranium and nuclear plant technology, maintaining critical leverage in the global energy market. Despite recent agreements between Iran and Rosatom to build additional reactors, including 4 more at Bushehr, experts are skeptical that the projects will materialize. Observers view these deals as symbolic, showcasing continued political alignment and highlighting nuclear power as one of Russia's few remaining high-value export sectors amid the broader economic decline. And that wraps up the headlines for this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. We are starting with a small update I made public on Wednesday on German humanitarian aid. The German city of Dresden has donated a neonatal ventilator to the Children's Hospital in Khmelnytsky. Both cities have a solidarity partnership since 2023. The ventilator is especially suitable for newborn babies and was especially requested by the Ukrainian city. And just a small update, last but not least, on a Saturday, we got an important update on the German participation in the Danish model. In late May 2025, Germany pledged to finance the production of Ukrainian-made far-reaching weapon systems without providing any details at all. Both the Ukrainian president and the Ministry of Strategic Industries referred on the same day to the production of drones, while quickly after that, Welt provided even more details and reported that Germany will invest around 400 million euros into the production of a long-range one-way attack drone, the Bars mini-cruise missile, and a drone interceptor. We now have another strong indicator that the reporting by Welt is indeed correct. According to a publication on the website of the Presidential Office of Ukraine, Zelensky said to journalists yesterday that Germany is ready to finance the production of interceptor UAVs in Ukraine. Of course, this is not a confirmation of the specific model, the VB140 Flamingo, but it is a confirmation of the drone variant, which means that the Welt reporting in general seems to be legit. And that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. German Aid. So there are a few things this week I wanted to talk about. Just some developments in the news that are a little more abstract. So the first one is there was reports about an all-female drone interception unit being started in Ukraine. So they're going to be the 427th Raro Separate Regiment of Unmanned Systems. And there's advertisements, and basically they're standard drone interception unit. The one except difference is that it's like an all female unit. So I don't know. I just thought this was an interesting development because I think both sides are under significant attacks from drones. I think that's obvious. And also there's an issue with manpower, right? Both sides are doing their best to keep their economies in working order. What that generally means is that they've mostly relied on older men who are more likely to have already received some level of military training and are going to have a minimal impact on the economy if you take them out of work, right? Versus younger people. That's been expressed by President Zelensky. I don't think the Russians have ever formally said that, but it seems to be their system as well. So I don't know. It seems like a smart move to try to free up some of that manpower by allowing certain backline combat roles to be fulfilled by women if you're going to rely mostly on men for the frontline stuff. So just thought that was an interesting development. Hopefully Russia doesn't do it as well, because I think they could really use better drone interception on their side, right? So that's that. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments about the all-female drone interception unit?
Well, I think it's positive development that they're aiming towards recruiting females in general. I know these positions are quite attractive because you tend to be quite certain that you won't end up too close to the front lines. So it's a relatively safe job compared to many others, similar to the mobile fire squads that have been a thing for about 2 years or more now, where they have machine guns or autocannons on trucks driving around to locations predetermined, depending on where the drones are flying towards Ukrainian cities, and they basically fire at them with machine guns. That's been relatively successful, but I think the potential in these drone anti-Shahed drone interceptor units, as they call it themselves, is quite large. They don't have a lot of units doing this right now, but as far as I know, they've gotten the order to expand massively. So the thing is, a lot of these positions are very attractive, but the demand for skill is also quite high compared to many other positions in the military. So the selection is probably a lot tighter, which means a lot of people won't be able to enter this kind of service. So opening up for more women applicants is probably an attempt to find more qualified personnel.
Yeah, so I think overall smart move by Ukraine. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to connect it to Germany's last news item, right? Ukraine has been funded by Germany for constructing or building interceptor drones. Do you know if it's only this one particular drone, by the way? Go.
The interceptor drone, as far as we know, yes, just this one, the Flamingo.
Was it written specifically that it will only be this one, or was it just that one that was mentioned?
Well, the only source we have for the variant, the model, is the VED report, and VED reported that it's the what's it called, Leoty, the long range attack drone, and the BARS mini cruise missile, and the Flamingo interceptor drone. That's the 3 drones mentioned under the financing of Ukrainian-made far-reaching. That's, by the way, interesting. Everyone in like English and stuff always says like long range, but the German government is very specific to not say Langstrecken, which means long range. They always say weitreichend, which just means far-reaching. So they're very specific in their choice of words regarding this. And yeah, that's the only model mentioned in the report.
Okay. Well, it's anyways a good sign, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why they are able to expand these units quite a lot. So that's good.
Okay, so the next item I have on my list of things I want to talk about was an article in Politico that came out this week. It's basically a hit piece on Yermak. So it basically said that the Ukrainian president's, the chief of staff, I think was what he is. What's his actual position, Erlend?
I think he's like the head advisor to the president or something.
Head advisor. Yeah, he's definitely like Zelensky's head advisor. That's beyond dispute. I don't know what his official title is, but anyway, he is. A piece in Politico came out, and it's pretty brutal against him. Basically, it says that he made a visit recently. I didn't actually cover it, but it happened maybe about 2 months. I think I did cover it actually. It was about 2 months ago. And basically they said, like, number one, people don't like him. People in the Trump administration don't really like dealing with him. And number two, and also a lot of Democrats don't like dealing with him. And then number two is that he's very it's not clear what he comes to Washington to do. Like, he comes, he has some meetings, he leaves, and the people who are involved are just kind of like, what was he here to accomplish? We don't really understand. So, I don't know. It seems like there's some pressure on the U.S. side to maybe telling Ukraine, like, get rid of this guy and send someone else. Personally, I'm not someone who is super well up to date or savvy about the nuances of Ukrainian politics, but I will say that Yermak doesn't seem popular even in Ukraine. Like, there's people I know who aren't super supportive of Zelensky. First off, I should say, even Ukrainians who don't support Zelensky recognize that he's the president and accept that he's the president. It's not that they're saying, it's not like the US where I live, where it's there's a really, really strong partisan feelings about it, regardless of what's going on in the world. It's like people accept that Zelensky's in charge, but they're like, a lot of people will say that he had a policy that was too easy on Russia, and that's why they don't support him to begin with, and that they would have had voted for someone else. Point being, obviously those people don't like Yermak, and there's a special hatred for Yermak. But also, even people who like or admire Zelensky, I've heard, are like, I like Zelensky, but I don't like Yermak. So there's not I will say, in all of the Ukrainians I've talked to about Ukrainian politics, in the limited way I have, there doesn't seem to be a lot of support for Yermak in general. No one's going around saying he's critical and he's the best and we need to keep him. So this pressure from the U.S. might be pretty serious for him. I don't know. It's been long debated that this guy, Zelensky, needs to get rid of this guy and pick someone else who's a little bit less abrasive or less controversial. So, I no evidence that's happening, but this Politico hit piece is kind of interesting for that reason. Anyone have any thoughts?
Not really.
Let me wade into Ukrainian politics and let me flail in the wind, I guess. That's fine. So yeah, I'm not an expert in Ukrainian politics. I'm not asking anyone to take my opinion at face value. You're welcome to go look any of this stuff up on your own. And that's, for what it's worth, this is just some of the stuff I've heard, and this is a Politico article that was published. So it is what it is. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. That's my Ukrainian politics for the month. Okay, and then the next item is a piece from the Moscow Times. Basically, it said Russian grassroots funding for the Ukraine war collapses. And this is by a study from an NGO. Basically, they said last year there were about, I want to say the figure was 500 million rubles. Was the one cited. Is that right? Or is it dollars? It looks like it's US dollars. Yeah, so 500 million US dollars last year, but this year it's down to 150 million in terms of tracking donated money. They cite a lot of reasons. One of the foremost reasons is scams. There's not really a lot of transparency or accountability in how the funds are used. The money just kind of gets sent and disappears. Even one of the Russians is saying even the more reputable charities that used to keep better funding records or transparent records are no longer doing that, because it seems like the expectation is relatively low that anyone keep any kind of verifiable records. So This kind of lack of trust in the voluntary contribution system seems to have really affected people's willingness to actually part with their hard-earned rubles. I have to imagine, too, that some of the pressures on the Russian economy that we've talked about and we'll talk about more soon are also eating into some of the funding that once would have gone, some of the disposable income that would have gone towards this. I think it's pretty important, obviously, in terms of scale. 500 million even isn't a ton when it comes to like military spending, although in the Russian military, that's not bad. But the point is that a lot of very important and innovative things happen at this level of funding and these types of organizations, right? In Ukraine, I think we've really seen a lot of success stories that started with small unit, did fundraising, were successful. That success was rewarded with more private support, and eventually that private support transitioned into widespread public good, either in terms of military capability or other services and things like that. So I think that even though it's not the largest scale in terms of the contributions, it's very important for having a military that's more responsive to certain needs. Another thing too is there's just certain things that like FPV drones and body armor and things like that these large scale militaries just aren't super well equipped to deliver to frontline units. So yes, you have a military that has billions of dollars on either side, but if you want actual body armor, a lot of times that just falls to you. So that stuff's kind of important at the ground level. It's responsive to needs that otherwise would be basically ignored in such a large and conservative organization as a major country's military. So, an important figure in terms of what's going on in Russia. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I mean, much like in Ukraine, the development of lots of systems like FPV drones, etc., has been driven by volunteers. So I don't know the level of it right now, because the Russians have actually funded quite a lot of drone manufacturing and development for at least 1.5 years now. So not sure if it's also partially due to that, maybe. But I'm not surprised about the non-transparency and scams being a thing in Russia. Interesting that the piece mentions this, actually.
It is, yeah. It's something that we've seen too in the Ukraine space, right? Is that there's obviously a lot of scams. I mean, just today there on Twitter there was kind of a thing. I don't know if anyone saw it, of like there's a pretty prominent scam account with like 20,000 followers, and there's a bunch of Ukrainian real legit fundraising accounts that are calling it out and basically saying you got to unsubscribe. And that scam account was getting so frustrated that it basically was starting to yell things like, if you guys don't fundraise, we've gotten $0 on our fundraiser, you guys all hate Ukraine, and stuff like that. So it's surprisingly important to have these stupid little scams on Twitter get called out, because it really does affect the overall reputation and trustworthiness of private fundraising efforts in general. We've seen a lot of even in Ukraine, the Ukraine situation, which is kind of unprecedented in terms of the scale and coordination of like global efforts to help private individuals contributing to something going on in the world. It's still, even though the internal policing of it, or whatever you want to call it, has been quite good, there's still a lot of scams out there. So I guess the last thing I'll say about it is just like my advice to people is to go with like well-established Ukrainian charities, right? We interviewed Come Back Alive recently. We have no formal relationship with them of any kind, but I will say that they're a great organization. They keep their records very transparently. They have great initiatives that do a lot of good. There's smaller organizations than Come Back Alive, but just make sure any organization you donate to keeps very clear and transparent financial records. There's plenty of there's plenty of methods and measures to do that these days. And there's plenty of organizations that do it. So there's no reason to donate to anyone who is just asking for money into a black box, right? There's lots of organizations where your money, your hard-earned dollars, will definitely go to a worthy cause, like tourniquets or things like that. So yeah, stick with trustworthy, well-established organizations and fundraising efforts. Make sure that they're transparent. Make sure that they're following they're not just posting stuff on Twitter about what they do, but also keeping like legal financial records transparently about it. Any final thoughts on that?
I can add something. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Stanley.
I can add something on the side of the Russian charities that are doing this. The Kremlin is afraid of grassroots anything in Russia. So an NGO setting up or a grassroots campaign for volunteers is something that they'll try to avoid at all costs, because that means local organization, which could lead to political action. And that scares them.
Oh, yeah, that's a very interesting point, and definitely something I would expect. Have you seen any action from the central government towards these kind of NGOs?
Not towards these kinds, but I've seen it towards other kinds in the past. And when there were organizations or protests or attempts to create a group of people with a common cause, usually the Kremlin goes hard on them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good point. So we just wanted to stress that a lot of military innovation and important services are provided by these groups. So it's good that Russia is failing in this regard. So next item, my last item for this week. It's a bit of an odd one. I'm not even totally sure it's related, but it's just related enough that I'm just going to throw it in. So this week, as everyone knows, Elon Musk relatively recently, about a month ago, departed the government of the U.S. He claimed that he would no longer actively involve himself in politics. A lot of people blamed that on a recent refusal by Trump to appoint a guy that he basically handpicked to be the new head of NASA. People thought that was either a signal from Trump that he was no longer going to listen to Musk, or that was a signal to Musk that he was kind of done and he wasn't going to get things that he wanted and he was was going to leave. None of that's officially known. I don't think Musk has ever said specifically why, but it's definitely public record that he wanted that guy appointed, and it's definitely public record that Trump basically said we're not going to go with that guy. So, and then shortly thereafter, he left. Musk left his advisory role. Admittedly, it was scheduled that his kind of term would be up. But anyway, since he's been out of the government, one of the people that allegedly was behind that decision is a very close advisor to Trump, a guy named Sergio Gore. He is in the White House presidential office staff and personnel office. And basically, he is someone who right now is in charge of vetting White House staff, checking the backgrounds of people and stuff. And ironically, he is someone who doesn't have clear origins. Basically, he claimed to be born in Malta, and that's what he said publicly, but no one is able to find any kind of birth record for him in Malta. The Maltese government, as far as I know, has never shown anything. So there's been a few media articles about this guy, and Elon Musk basically commented on them. And Elon Musk basically inferred that he's a Russian spy. That may or may not be a reference to some of the media reports about this guy that basically say his name is Goryachev, which is Gore is short for Goryachev, which is very convenient. That he's a Russian. He's not Maltese. He's a Russian who was in Malta. That people, I don't know if this is definitely confirmed, but it's something that I heard in all the noise about this, that people refer to him in Malta as the Russian. That being said, particularly this Goryachev name is a Russian I want to say a there is a Goryachev already, and it's not this guy. So some people have said that that's debunked. I guess it's possible there's another Goryachev. I don't know, but all that to say, Elon Musk is like definitely accusing this guy of being some kind of secret Russian agent who is currently in charge of staffing at the White House. So yeah, I can't say for sure this is any of this is real or news. I don't know what it seems definitely true that we don't know. No, there's no birth certificate for this guy, but like that's as far as it goes in terms of publicly confirmed information. There's no definite confirmation that he's like a Russian agent or anything like that. So just a weird little side story. Yeah, thought I should mention it. Any final thoughts on this before I wrap up my stuff I wanted to talk about? Yeah, I didn't know what to say about any of that either. Okay, so that's pretty much it for my segment. So now we're going to move to Standomir's segment. This week there was a very important event in Russia, the International Economic Forum, I believe it's called. Standomir will of course correct me in a moment if I'm wrong. So we just wanted to. That's right,
Yeah,
St. Petersburg Economic
yeah.
Forum. So we're just going to have a little update from Standomir about what happened there. We are going to actually do a little recorded piece. We'll probably release it on Wednesday that will actually cover Putin's remarks at the event, because there was some mainstream media coverage of that. If you guys saw, he said some very specific, like geopolitical ranty things in that speech that he gave that are not 100% related to the actual economic stuff. So we're going to save that for like another day. For now, we're actually going to just talk about the economic forum itself, what happened, and some of the information we can glean from that event. Standomir, over to you.
Yeah, this was actually a big one, because this was the first time that Russian officials actually admitted that something's going on with the economy and it's not good. So the first meeting was between Reshetnikov, the Minister of Economic Development, then Nabiullina, the head of the central bank, and the Minister of Finance, Siluanov. And they were curated by the usual curator for the forum, who has the role of asking the tough questions, Andrei Makarov. And it started off terrible and continued to be terrible. Because at one point in the first initial questions, Reshetnikov, who is the Minister of Economic Development, said that currently they have a problem producing heavy equipment and exporting it because of the high interest rate, and explained that, let's say, from the price of a Russian locomotive, if they want to export it, because you don't sell the locomotive directly when a customer comes, you have a long-term contract, and during that contract you borrow money, you build a vehicle, and then you transport it, and then you get the money from the buyer. And he explained that within that, because of the high interest rate, just the ruble cost is 20% of the entire thing, because that's how much you have to pay the bank for the short-term loan. And then Nabiullina immediately asked him, okay, in 2023 we had a low interest rate. What was stopping you from selling locomotives back then? Again, this is between people who should be coordinating together to really run the Russian economy, and they're fighting in public against each other and have a hostile relationship that is visible. And the rest of the meeting between them went in a similar direction. So that is how we got the question about the Russian economy, that maybe the Russian economy has failed to have a good investment climate, because it hasn't moved anywhere in the last 25 years. And again, you got the regular response. No, it's just that the companies that make these ratings for the security of the investment are actually Western companies, so they're just spreading lies about Russia. And then Andrei Makarov did something interesting, and he said, okay, but how in our country we're going to say that you are an investor, you bring your money to us, and then how are you going to protect that investment if our courts, and he didn't quite mention the court, he mentioned the prosecutor general's office, and he said that prosecutor general's office says that now a crime is committed in terms of funds being allocated or something being bought at the point the statute of limitation starts, not at the point of when the action was taken in the past. No, the statute of limitation now, according to the Russian Prosecutor General's office, starts at the moment they notice it. So they can say, okay, we just noticed the privatization deal in the 90s was done illegally. There is no statute of limitation because now we just notice it, and we can now seize the funds. And what Makarov tried to say was that in this climate, maybe Russia isn't exactly a good spot for investment if this continues. The other thing that we saw was that in another meeting, Anton Siluanov, again, the finance minister, was pushed to say that the Russian budget has faced a storm. Those were his exact words. And in terms of the growing deficit, that they're now struggling to cover it. In the first meeting, the most important quote I can point to, and if you know Russian, you should really watch these two meetings, because you can see the animosity between these people, because someone is to blame for the economy going wrong, and they're just passing the blame from one to the other. But what was the most important statement that was taken was from Reshetnikov, who was asked about the state of the economy. Then first the question was answered by Siluanov, who said that the economy is cooling, but after that there's going to be summer. Nabiulina said that the economy is going through a transition from an overheated economy, so there should be some cooling. And Reshetnikov plainly said that if we look at the data, we're now on the verge of a recession. And that is the first time the recession word is used by a Russian official of his caliber. The other things that we saw at the economic forum was that the metallurgical company Severstal, its CEO, said that at the current rate of the ruble, so the ruble for him is considered too strong, he expects that metallurgical companies in Russia will just have to close down factories because it's unprofitable for them to either build for the domestic market, which is oversaturated, or export with the current high value of the ruble. He also said that acceptable rate of the ruble for them would be something around 90 to 100 rubles per USD, so per an American dollar. That is the point at which they're going to return to some profitability, and they won't have to close down factories. So the current strength of the ruble is going to hurt not just the Russian budget with the oil, but it's going to hurt the entire export-oriented economy. The other thing that was mentioned was in the second meeting by German Graf, who is the CEO of Sberbank, which is Russia's largest and state-owned bank. And he said that what he's seen over the last 6 months is that people are struggling to pay their debts, and not just people, but companies, because 70% of the loans that are given out to companies are actually floating loans. So with the interest rate going up,
I hate to interrupt you. Unfortunately, it seems about a minute ago, like you were very clear for most of it, but there may be a connection issue. You're a little like I don't know. The audio quality is not great. Could you reconnect maybe?
Yes.
Oh, that seemed better.
Should I continue?
Yeah, there was some rubber.
Ah.
No, it's good now. Try again.
Yeah. At which point did you lose me? Okay, I'll start.
You can.
Yeah.
The disagreement between the two Russian officials and first time someone had mentioned deflation. Yeah, I would say that's more or less.
Yeah, so this was the first time for a Russian official, so a minister, to say that Russia is actually heading for a recession. And they expect that the growth in investment was going to also go down. They expect that the third and fourth quarter would be really bad.
Yes, Stanimir, I think you should try and reconnect because it's happening again. So we'll just keep the stream warm in the meantime. Yeah, very sorry about that, but I guess it's the stuff is super interesting as well. The fact that there's internal disputes about the state of the Russian economy between Russian officials, and yeah, damn it.
Yeah, this is something I was going to ask Stanimir about. He's definitely more knowledgeable about this than me, but I think it's a great, like we were just talking last week about like how, first off, what's the big problem of the Russian economy, right? The problem is they do have a decent amount of like companies that produce things. The problem is they're not able to interface their internal economy with the wider world, right? That's the issue. So to have this forum as like a measurable way to calculate or like to see, it's on display, like how integrated is Russia into the international economy. And I think the answer is like not very integrated. Okay, Stanimir, you want to give us a little test, just like a couple sentences?
Okay, and what you said is that it's not integrated. What Russians are saying is that the forum is becoming less international and less about our economy.
Yeah, we can hear you a lot better now.
Yeah, seems good.
So what I was going to point to was that the CEO of Sberbank was another person who was talking at the forum, and he said that they're facing rising delinquencies when it comes to people who've taken out loans in terms of mostly small and medium-sized companies. So what they're expecting is that these are going to start bankrupting. And something that happened recently was just last week. I think shopping center, which was initially valued at 18 billion or something like that rubles, was transferred to Sberbank to pay off debts because of a late, in lieu of debts, not to pay off debts, because the company that owned the shopping center couldn't service their debts, and it went back to Sberbank at the price of 6 billion. That was the debt that they had to cover. And this is going to continue and happen even more from what we heard from Gref, because he expects that just a 1% decrease in the central bank key interest rate isn't enough to prevent this at this point. The other thing we saw at the forum was the last thing that happened today was that Rosneft's Igor Sechin spoke a bit. And he says that for him, the plan is for oil prices to be at $42, $43 for 2026. So Rosneft just wants to pump more. It doesn't care that there's not enough to the budget. It can make a profit at this price. The budget is not happy with this price, but it can make enough of a profit. And it's always been the company that is against plans to cut production, because when it cuts production, it has to stop drilling, it has to stop pumping oil from some of its sites, but the cost to continue operating the sites continues to be on the company's balance sheet. So that's why they're focused on selling as much as possible, and they can weather through the storm of low prices. And they're also for removing all production cuts. And we'll see if Sechin and the other oil companies can manage to force the Russian government's hand and increase production over the next year. So the final big news for this week was that the Russian Federal Management Agency Rosimущество managed to acquire the airport in Moscow, Domodedovo. It was nationalized by a Moscow arbitration court on the 17th of June, and it's valued at 1 trillion rubles. It was made up of, the parent company controlled something like 25 companies. And Putin is on record saying that this is not nationalization because there were issues with the ownership of the airport from before. So we shouldn't consider it as a move by the government to rapidly take over the airport. It's something that's been in the works for a long time. But for me, that's just excuses. It's another nationalization of a major asset in Russia, showing that, again, your assets in Russia, the moment you lose connections with someone high up in the government, they can be taken over easily. Now, when it comes to commodity exports for this week, the Russian Grain Union expects that for June, they're going to export another just another 200,000 tons of Russian wheat. The reason for that is that the price of wheat globally is low, and with the high ruble, they have very low profitability for Russian farmers. So because of that, we're also seeing that the number of legal entities that are primarily engaged in agriculture in Russia has started to decline. For the first 5 months of the year, the decrease has been only 119 entities, but that's compared to 171 new entities being formed in 2024. Also, because they can no longer afford to expand their business, we've seen that vacancies in the agricultural sector have been declining steadily since the start of the year. And by May 2025, the decrease is by 31%, which is showing that Russian agriculture is no longer as profitable as before. And another thing for the wheat farmers, because the Russian government saw that this is a profitable sector, they imposed an export duty, which they have to pay before exporting any goods outside of Russia. There is a quota that they can use, but after the quota, you have to pay the export duty. And that's why Russian farmers are stuck not being able to export to the international market. Also, on the commodities front, the Russian Deputy Prime Minister Novak, who used to be the Minister of Energy and is covering the oil and gas sector as the Deputy Prime Minister, said that because of the high price of the ruble and the low oil prices before the spike at the end of the week, this is a very difficult situation right now for Russia. So we have another admission that things are not going well, and it's coming from the highest office, the highest possible place. In the construction market, we're seeing, because of the drop in the scale of construction, that rebar prices have dropped to their level from 2022 at 36,000 rubles and are expected to fall by another 5 or 7% because of that excessive supply that the metallurgists talked about. And they're not expecting any recovery because the construction sector isn't what it used to be. So the oversupply will continue, and they'll have to scale down production. In another construction news, so the one segment that's doing good when it comes to the Russian construction sector is the most expensive sector, the premium and luxury editions. So in this case, prices there have gone up 30% over the last 12 months. So a single square meter right now costs something between 34,000 and 51,000 euros in that sector. Again, something that shows that the Russian ultra-rich are leaving the rest of the country behind, and they can spend enormous amounts on luxury within Russia. Also, the commissioning rate of new housing in Russia decreased by up to 13% when compared to 2024 this year. In May, only 5.9 million square meters were commissioned, and this is also over 16% lower than in May 2024. And the volume of investment in the Russian real estate market is expected in 2025 to be half of what it was in 2024, or around 600 billion rubles. Now, what I collected at the end of the week is interesting data points. So what I have is that the shipment of metal goods right now has started to be transported primarily by trucks and not by Russian rail. And the reason for that is that Russian rail is being too expensive. The quality of the transportation service has dropped. The costs are much higher than before, and they're not reliable to arrive on schedule. Again, the Russian Railways is one of the companies that has been struggling a lot with the readjustment of Russia from going to an economy that works with the West in Europe to an economy that works with China, and it's showing. Also, for the first 5 months of the year, we saw that drinks like beer, cider, meat, they grew in production by 3.9%. However, it has to be said that according to Russian experts, this is just an adjustment with the occupied territories being included within the overall tally, and not so much an increase of the whole production. That is for just Russia. The Russian Deputy Prime Minister Mantrov said that the volume of Russian parallel imports, so that thing that's keeping the economy alive with Western parts, has been halved since 2023. And in 2025, they're only importing $2.5 billion worth of goods per month, which is considerably lower than in prior years. Also, they expect to build 214 planes per year. Those are the plans for 2017 and 2028. I want to point out that the factory that's supposed to build them still has a serious shortage, and they're not going to be able to build more than a single plane this year. So I don't know how they're going to scale production, but this is what Mantrov is taking his reputation on. Another thing that's happening is that there are more 14 to 18-year-old Russians joining the workforce. So the number of CVs submitted to job applications online by this age group has grown for the first 5 months of the year by 74% to nearly 700,000. And Russian manufacturers of cardboard containers now expect their market to also slow down. The growth in previous years was something like 7.6% per year. Right now, they're going to slow down to 1 to 5% per year growth until 2028. Again, another sign that the Russian economy is slowing down, and it's only being driven by the military economy. The civilian economy is being left behind. In another news related to that, the Russian car maker Avtovaz expects its sales for 2025 to be 20 to 25% lower. So something like 370,000 cars. And it's going to decrease its production of passenger cars throughout the year because it sees demand for them dropping by 30 to 35%. The Russian United Aircraft Building Corporation, which is famous for providing the Russian Air Force with planes, and also is the parent company that's also producing those 2 planes that they can't build. So it's set to fire 1,500 people from its Moscow offices, which is about 25% of its management staff, in order to lower the cost of the company. One thing that's been mentioned repeatedly by Rostech, which is the parent company of the United Aircraft Building Corporation, is that they're having very low profitability. So this is part of the moves to improve their profitability and lower costs. And finally, from the interesting data points, we see that strong alcoholic beverage in Russia are still down in trading and in production. For the first 5 months, they're down 13.5%. Vodka sales are down 5.8%, and cognac sales are down 11.4%. This is due to the increase of the excise tax on strong alcoholic beverage by 15%, and the increase of what is called the minimum sale price of such beverages by 16 to 17% over this year alone. Now, finally, we have the inflation and debt for this week. So for the period of the 10th to the 16th of June, Rostat's official inflation figure stood at 0.04%, and the inflation for June so far has been 0.08%, and for the year 3.64%. However, we expect a high jump in inflation at the end of June when the new utilities fees are adopted, and that's going to increase the inflation, like I said, by probably over 1% within that first week. Now, what's interesting is that in parallel, I followed the Romer data for average family spending by Russian families, and this week it was 29.3% higher than in the same week in 2024. So a huge jump in costs for families, which is much, much higher than the official inflation figures. Also, on the debt issue side, there were 2 auctions this week. The first one managed to sell almost 110 billion rubles at a yield of 15.48%. That's closer to the yield from the past few weeks. The second one managed to sell 86.5 billion rubles, this time at a yield of 15.17%. This is the second lowest yield for Russian debt this year, apart from that small auction last week, which sold just 15 billion rubles, sorry, not 15, 12 billion rubles at 14.8%. What is interesting, however, is that due to the increased demand for Russian debt from Russian banks, the Russian Ministry of Finance managed to complete its goal for this quarter early, and it's managed to raise over 1.3 trillion rubles so far, which is the goal set for the quarter. I'm guessing the rest of the year, the rest of the quarter is going to be just bonus on top of that. And the reason the banks can actually buy so much Russian debt is because of the weekly repo deals from the Russian central bank. Now, those aren't exactly money printing, but it's close, because there are some funds within the Russian central bank to be used for repos from small banks which don't have as many financial products they can sell. So what they do is they put their money on deposit within the Russian central bank, and the Russian central bank uses that partially for repo deals with the big banks which have liquidity issues. But we're getting close to the point where we can call it just money printing. And I think that's it for the economic news for this week.
Thank you, Stanimir. That was a very detailed report. I guess like just one question, because then we'll move to the next segment. But you had some questions in chat. We'll get to towards the Q&A. But why do you think that these high-level economic players in Russia, the policymakers, are so openly kind of arguing? You definitely made the point that they're trying to place the blame on each other, which that makes perfect sense. But I would say in the West, we typically have this view of Russia as like, a very authoritarian state that you can't really criticize Putin without, severe falling out of a window, as we would say. I guess my question would be, do you think that they're just so important to Putin that they feel safe enough to like voice their opinions? Is it that they're not actively saying that the invasion of Ukraine is what's to blame for all of this? They're just saying the economy is bad, and as long as they stay away from the actual political issue behind it, they're safe? Or like, what do you think it is? Why are they being so open about this?
No, I think it's because things aren't going well and nerves are showing. I mean, it's like you're on a big project and you start missing deadlines and something keeps breaking, and you start having adversarial relations with the people you've worked with until now. So this is what's happening. Things are going bad and nothing they're doing is fixing things. And they're starting to get aggravated. And the people who they can blame for some of the things that are happening are just over in the next department or in the next ministry, as is in this case. The other thing is, for people who don't watch Russian TV, Putin's positions, now they don't say it like Putin is wrong, but Putin's positions are usually challenged, and challenged by not even ministers, but Duma deputies who, for example, are calling his decision to use the parity GDP status of fourth country in the world and saying that's a wrong metric because we can't buy iPhones for rubles. Again, this is happening every day. So it's not always something that gets you thrown out of the window. And for example, Andrei Makarov has been doing this type of hosting of forums and asking such difficult questions for the people who attend the forum for several years. He's not going away. He's allowed to do that because the system needs to have some criticism. But I think at this point, the system is, they've reached the point where they're afraid someone is going to get removed and blamed for something. And they're trying to make it so that it's not exactly them. And they're trying to do that through the official statements of the agencies or the federal level institutions they're running, or in these economic forums scoring points, like how Nabiullina just destroyed Reshetnikov in front of everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point, that the Russian system does allow for like technical debates about certain things as long as they don't spill over into like mass public things. So arguing about which metrics are appropriate to measure the economy by a Duma deputy, that, like, you're right, that makes sense that they're allowed to do that to a certain degree. Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Stanimir, for that explanation. So we got to, speaking of the anemic Russian train industry, we got to talk about some trains, guys. So I will now turn it over to Mr. J, who has been monitoring some trains in Russia, to explain what's going on. Mr. J, over to you.
Oh, hello everyone. Hello to the audience as well. Yeah, trains. I think we have some news basically from yesterday where a Russian oil tanker train was targeted in the occupied part of Zaporizhia. And yeah, here we can see it.
I guess it started with the geolocation from EMEA.
Yeah, like just to say a few words about myself, I'm one of the volunteers here around at Tochnyi, and we are tracking what's going on. If a drone strike occurs, we can do geolocations, and basically yesterday in the early evening, Central European time, the first footage we can see here popped up, where you could see, yeah, this burning oil or fuel cargo. You can also see a bit of the environment. We were like pretty sure it was recent because we haven't seen it. And then, yeah, more and more information came out, and finally today, yeah, you want to talk? Yeah, there we have the geolocation, so it's close to the town of Molochansk. You can also see the train line here, and today it was a bit like even more exciting because the footage was released from the Ukrainians. Here we can see it now. We have a video. You can see the explosions from the fuel tank cargoes, and yeah, of course the train also hasn't moved. So this is basically the moment where we have the confirmation that this train was struck. You can also like it lines up very well with the images that were released previously, and yeah, it's a huge explosion as well. So very neat strike performed by allegedly the Secret Service of Ukraine, by Gore. And interestingly, I'm not sure if you're aware, Erlend. Actually, it was a cooperation between two drone teams. Actually, did you know that?
I just looked at the video, Jay. I didn't read the post.
Okay, and let me go on. Yeah, oh, this is like a very decent quality video. We see several burn marks on the other cars. Like, sadly, there's no like chain reaction visible where you see like the whole train go poof, basically. But that's due to like how these, like, there's a reason even in Russia these oil cargo or fuel cargo, they have some protection, so to prevent that the whole train gets basically exploded. But there's definitely huge damage. Also, like, the railway tracks will be damaged. It will not be easy to put out this fire. It will probably take them a few days until it's extinguished. And yeah, about the cooperation I managed, yeah, we had also a video today, interestingly, not only from Gore, but also from the long strike drone company from the 65th Mechanized Brigade, which is also like operating in that area since a long time. The Ronins, some probably may know this drone unit. They can go very deep, and this strike is deep. It's like, I don't know, roughly 40 kilometers away from the front line, and the drone teams are not operating actually at the front line, so pretty deep. pretty surprising. Yeah, very decent strike. Great.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the fact that we've seen more and more drone strikes against trains and other logistics in the southern Zaporizhia area. So when before we saw maybe one every 6 months, it's been quite a few the last 6 months. So that's an interesting trend. And I think that goes hand in hand with technology development and also most probably, I would assume, Ukraine being more interested in striking these areas and these logistic points.
Yeah, agree. It's scaling up. We recently had a train in the village of not far away, but in the west from there, in Novobohdanivka, where you have some kind of railway hub, where also like a similar pattern of strike happened. Yeah, it's really scaling up. It has become more common, and of course, the obvious part about is that the ability to strike deeper has increased, has been scaled up, and the Ukrainians are actually like capable to perform these pretty like deep strikes. Of course, they need some kind of recon ISR, so you can't just fly with drones there, but you have to know that the train is there or whatever you want to strike. It could be a radar or air defense system, and they really have improved to being able to hit these targets, which are quite far away from the front line, and are able to successfully strike them and cause damage.
And it's not just been logistics and trains, etc. It's also been one of the most notable incidents was I think Nemesis using a heavy bomber drone and hitting an S-300 battery quite far away from the front lines. And in that case, it was stated that they used the heavy bomber, I think it was a Vampire, or if I'm not mistaken, as a one-way drone, and that it was disposed of at the end of the attack, basically. So, yeah, there's been several kinds of attacks as well, and we've seen them not only in the southern districts, it's also been happening east and northeast. So yeah, it's been ticking up with like attacks that are a lot even further away than this. So this was actually not that far away, just 38 kilometers.
Yeah, but when you go back to, let's say, 2 years ago, this would probably been like impossible. Right?
Almost, yeah. I would say it was happening like once a year or something.
Yeah, very rare incident. Yeah.
Okay, I know you have some stuff you wanted to share on the screen.
Yeah, let's try it if it's like everything is prepared. Yeah, I hope you can put it into the center, and then like before I start here, I want to introduce it shortly. Like the question is basically how many trains are basically in this area, and we know the Russians are like heavily relying on train logistics, pretty much all over on the front line, as good as they're capable. So this is like, and for the strategic people here around, tactics is for beginners, logistics is like for the experts. Like it's the butter and bread of warfare. Logistics are essential to maintain, to continue to fight in every way. Like you need ammunitions, you need fuel, you need bread, water for the soldiers. I could go on here with many more examples. And what I want to show you now is there is like quite good possibility to track where these trains are with satellite images, and that's what I would like to show you a bit. And because some people, this is a very successful strike for Ukrainians. We can all be like the people who performed that can be very proud of that. But there are a lot of trains, and I will now try to show you a bit how to track them, how you can see them, and that's what I would like to do here. So
Yeah.
I hope the screen sharing is working. Yep. Oh. It was a bit too inactive too long. So what do we have here? Let me introduce this quickly. Does it work? Yep, it does work. So this is the former Sentinel Hub Copernicus browser. This is like these are satellite images, thankfully sponsored from the European Union. This is free to use satellite imagery. It's not high resolution. It's relatively low, but it's free to use. Everyone can use it. Everyone with a personal computer in the audience can use it. And this is not the common, like the Sentinel-2, where you have the actual satellite images with cloud and everything. This is the interesting part about tracking something like trains or ships. Anything that is big enough will show up here with the synthetic aperture radar. And yeah, as you can see here, this is from yesterday when the strike happened. Yeah, that's June 21st.
By the way, if you try and press F11, you may get a little bit cleaner.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Looks great. Okay, I'll maximize it.
Just for the record, this is here the usual Russian jamming in Crimea. You always will see it. Doesn't have anything with trains, but the Russians love to jam satellites, and this is happening here. But now we go into the detail, and let me just change the mode. Now it's getting interesting, and we can go into the area. Here we have Melitopol. Yeah, one of the largest towns in the occupied zone of the Zaporizhia Oblast. Pretty large. It's a city logistics hub, and you can. I'm not sure how good I will zoom in a bit. You can already see, like here, you can see with the SAR actually the railway tracks because they are metallic. Yeah, and SAR reacts on like metallic reflections. So here you can see the train lines, basically. And when we zoom in more, that's the interesting part. What I want to show you. That's maybe too much. So here we can see the railway tracks. Here's Novo Bordanivka. This is a bit, as I said, a railway junction. So railways like are interconnected here. And now these white lines you can see here. Is it good? Like, is it good visible for the audience?
Yes, we can see them clearly.
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, those are trains, basically. Those are trains. Yeah. And you can see like here in the fields, you have almost no, this is all like agricultural area, no metallic reflections. Maybe sometimes in the towns you have something, could be anything metallic, but the trains are clearly visible here. And here you already, like, as I said, it's a junction here of already two from yesterday. Like they are both there. And there are many more. Like I will show you some trains now. Yeah, you go into the south. Here's the next one. It's not far away. It's just a couple of kilometers here. Train 1, 2, 3. A lot more trains in Melitopol here as well. 4, 5, 6. Only on that like area. It's it's not a big railway. I think it's okay. It's 2-track, but yeah. And this is interesting. I was asking myself here, is this a train? No, those are probably railway cars. The trains are brighter for a reason. You can see. So these are just railway cars idling, or they are just there. And now we come to the interesting part about the strike from yesterday. I will zoom about it out. Here was the junction, right? And here's the train line going. And now we go to Molochansk, not far away from Tokmak. And when we zoom in, we can see a train from yesterday. Here, pretty long. Now I can't guarantee you if it's that train that was struck, because of course it's a satellite image. It gets taken once a day, and it could be a different train. I can't guarantee you this is the train, but it's relatively. I would say it might be the right one because of the length. That you could see it in the video. With the fuel cars, it was pretty long, and I think it's a decent lineup. And actually, the train is here in Molochansk, and when it got hit, it's about this area here. This is where the strike happened, or the strikes happened. So pretty interesting, I would say.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, and there are even more trains. Like I think here in the east there was a small one. Not really sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is all also like train railway, because I'm not really sure, but definitely something there with cargo, and it's active. And yeah, this is like how, like a method how you can, at least with the limitations that are given, of course, see how much traffic you have there, and like, especially like in that area. I'm not even sure, like this here, for example, is also a train. So this is something for research, basically. It may even be that the Russians are. This is pretty close to the front line, Vasilivka. Yeah, the front line is here about. But it may even be that the Russians are using the trains to go so far to the front line, up to here. But it's safe to say that, especially when it goes a bit deeper, you have like a lot of traffic. And this is, of course, good, that we know that the Ukrainians have scaled up their long-range strike capability with drones, maybe in the future even more. I think, like, when I remember correctly, Germany may be interested in scaling this like long-range strike, like even longer strikes up with funding for Ukraine. And yeah, this is like several trains a day are passing through here. It's pretty important. Here's also a train. This is also a train. So there's a lot of traffic on these railroads, and I would be careful to say that the Russians have some kind of logistic problems or something. It could be in a different area when everything which is put on the trains is not on the trains anymore. That's a different party, but the system is working. That's what I want to like point out. Working until it is like disrupted. Let's say a bridge gets very sleepy, then it's a bit more like difficult for them if it's a larger bridge. And about the train strike here, if we are realistic, the Russians will currently be very busy. It's not even 24, or it's roughly 24 hours ago, and the footage was posted very fast. Like some very obsessed OSINTers actually looked at the shadows from the trees, like on which time it was, and so they basically published it instantly. But yeah, probably in the week, I would say, as an estimate, the trains will smoothly pass through again. Yeah. And this, like, the Russians are also capable. They have their own railway engineer troops to
They're very
repair.
capable, super
Yeah.
capable in this particular field.
Yeah, this is one of the strengths from the a bit of. Is it a Soviet legacy? I'm not sure, Erlend.
Yeah, it is. Like Ukraine as well has the same thing. Like a train track is blown up, or maybe some natural disaster happens, and a few meters of train track needs to be repaired. Day after, it's fixed. That's kind of the norm. And when we look at our own countries in the west of Europe, right? If let's say that some ground is destroyed because of flooding or something, and the train track is destroyed, it can take months sometimes before it's fixed. So yeah. That's very impressive. But it's because of the importance that kind of logistics has, right, in these former Soviet countries. So much emphasis was put on train logistics, which is, of course, very good when you have it operational, because the capacity is enormous, and also efficiency is very high. You don't need 20 truck drivers and 20 trucks. You can drive one train with the same amount or even more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons, of course, is like both countries, Ukraine and Russia, are like pretty large in terms, of space. I mean, Russia is the largest nation in the world, and Yeah, of course, there's a reason that they are heavily relying on these railway engineers because of basically, let's say, just hypothetical, there would be a Ukrainian sabotage on the how's it called, the Russian train line, which goes basically from the western country to Vladivostok. Like you could, with a few critical strike, you could really hamper their logistics because this country is so large and relies so heavily on these railways as well. Huh? Would be interesting to see a train spider web. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about that myself, because especially there are some tunnels and large bridges that is connecting the Trans-Siberian railway, which is super important for Russia's war logistics, right? So if you could blow up a tunnel, especially, that would be the most disruptive part, I think.
Yeah, agree. Like this is like not even Superman could fix this quickly. This is like where it's getting very hard and time and labor intensive to fix it, especially if it's very rural terrain as well. Yeah, you're in Siberia somewhere where the infrastructure is not that good, where maybe not so like it's you actually have to get people there. Will take a couple of days, and yeah, I agree. That would be very interesting to see, but have to wait and see.
Boys, this is a very interesting discussion. I have some questions for you that are like increasingly dumb, but I want to make sure you guys like. Did you have any concluding thoughts or?
Well, I think that we are. So one of the things that is interesting about the drone warfare is that it used to have quite. We saw basically 3 different kinds. We saw the heavy bombers, FPV drones, and long-range attack drones, right? Those typical Lyuts and Antonovs going into further into Russia or in Crimea. But this kind of far-reaching, as you say in Germany, this range in between the heavy bombers and everything that is like between 40 or 35 and maybe 80 kilometers, we've seen an uptick in attacks in this range, and I think that is kind of important. It's very important because Russia has dispersed their logistics a lot more into smaller settlements, etc., spread out along the front lines. And one of those reasons is probably the amounts of attacks that Ukraine has done to the larger depots further behind the lines. So that complicates things for Ukraine in a way, but it also opens up for an opportunity to disrupt Russian logistics. But that capability wasn't very well developed, right? So we've seen now some investments into Ukrainian drone production from external countries, like Germany has funded with quite a substantial amount of money Ukraine's drone program, and I hope that is going to excel some of these groups that have been able to do these strikes once in a while before, and that we will see them much more regularly. That's my thoughts.
So my questions, I got 4 questions in increasingly dumb order. The first question you mostly answered, but so as far as I could tell, you were kind of implying earlier, but you said more definitively just now that there was like a technical hurdle in terms of Ukraine being able to do this, like hit trains behind the lines, basically. And that it sounds like they've kind of overcome the technical problem, and the technical problem was getting enough ordnance on a small enough drone. Was that like it seems like they fixed that problem?
It's a range thing, basically. You said like
Right.
you see that like you won't operate the train like 10 kilometers to the front line, of course. Like you have this here, but this is not being used because you could throw Mavics there, or like you could shell the trains or whatever. So this is like basically where you have to develop the range, and this is already, I don't know, do we have a tool here? Yeah, we have a tool. Oh no, this is the wrong one. Anyways, like you just have to scale up the range. That's it. Basically, you need range,
Right.
and then you can hit.
So better
and surveillance.
ordnance. They figured out a way to actually hurt a train at that distance. That's the technical challenge.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's Ukraine has long-range attack drones that can go a lot further, but they are fixed-wing one-way drones with. They have certain targeting systems, but they don't necessarily have the possibility to be piloted real time, right? But and that's where the gap has been in the technology, the being able to fly in real time and guide drones in this space between 35 kilometers and the until the very long range stuff. So that's where the technology has been developed over the last year, I would say, a lot. But also, this stuff is very expensive. They're relying on a lot more expensive communication systems. So they are being funded because it's been proven that it works. Hence, for instance, the Nemesis attack on the S-300 system and other attacks similar to this one from yesterday. I think they've gotten more investments both from the Ukrainian government, but also we now see Germany, for instance, funding these programs is probably going to help these units that they've had a very limited capability to do these things before, at least. So yeah, I hope that this is something that we'll see more weekly rather than monthly, and that the amount of the attacks is going to go up quite a lot.
Okay, that makes sense. And then my next question is, are we seeing the evidence of the Russians? Like, I know earlier Jay was monitoring, like the Russians were connecting up some train lines. I think that yellow line maybe is something they built. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But the point is, are we seeing evidence the Russians are trying to strengthen the train network in the area, like construction, new tracks, anything like that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, you pointed it out. Like, this is why I chose the deep. Like, I'm sorry for our mapper. I would use Andrew's map for sure, but in this case, I use Deep State because they are one of the few who like correctly display exactly this yellow line here. To answer the first part of your question, this is the newly built, which was opened or was open for service around like in the beginning of it's almost 1 year ago. It was early June when it was finished, because I was the guy actually who tracked or monitored it very closely on social media as OSINT. It's funny, like, sorry, before I go to the next part of the question, but actually, like, the Russians tried to finish this newly constructed rail line. They started in autumn 2023, and the goal was to open it like in spring 2024. And they were almost finished. Like, the construction was pretty rapid. There are some bridges, for example, like here they had a bridge, and here it's more like not really bridge, an aqueduct. I don't know. Here it's a swampy area, and here is also like a road crossing. And they actually managed to build all this, but sorry, I have good memories. They were not able to close this gap. There was a small gap. You could see it on satellite images here. And they took it, for some reason, it took them weeks to get it finished, basically. Everything else looked finished from the sky, from the satellite. Of course, I also looked with the satellite with the synthetic aperture radar, if there is like visible trains there. And sometimes you could, while they did the construction, you could see trains, these construction trains, but there was like still this gap. But yeah, finally in June 2024, they managed to finish it. And this is, of course, when I zoom out, you can see how important it is, because this railway is also going on. Anyway, it was critical for them, because the only other connection is here at Crimea, of course, the Kerch Bridge, which were very reliant back in the past in 2022 and 2023. And yeah, of course, it was targeted. We remember that. And then only this rail way was there. Basically, it's from Donetsk to Volnovakha. This is also a railway hub. You always have a lot of trains there, and then up to Mariupol. But they couldn't use it. They couldn't use it, and for the simple reason, the front line was too close. Like that's actually the area where the Russians have advanced here. But back in the days, the Ukrainians were in Vuhledar, Vodiane, even further in the east, even here in Novomikhailivka, and that's not far away from this railway, and they couldn't use it. Yeah, this is where they piled up a huge chunk of cargoes. There is some kind of shield back in the days, but currently that's like the bad development. I think you have to point it out. Now they have two, because they can use this one. Yeah, it's far away from the front. Of course, maybe we also see Ukrainian strikes. It's possible, but they can use this one, and they can use the newly built one to supply the troops all the way here in the occupied areas they have. So yeah, to answer the second part, yeah, the capabilities basically have increased in terms of logistics there.
And are they trying to build any like new stuff, or that they've finished that track and they're done?
Sorry, I missed that. Yes, like there were rumors, but interestingly, like there was a lot of misinformation because I looked everything up. There was a rumor this could potentially happen because it would make sense that they build another junction from the newly built railway here to Taganrog. This was planned, or there was some Russian announcements. It would make sense, definitely, to make another connection here to further improve their supply abilities. But I have not seen any evidence of it yet. And there was another rumor, which is also till today falsified, that they announced or said that would like to build a coastline railway, basically connecting these cities here, Mariupol with Berdansk, and then and go further on here to the Melitopol Crimea line, yeah, to make a on the sea. Would be also kind of smart in a sense. It's very hard for the Ukrainians to strike if that would be built, but also zero evidence, hasn't happened.
Okay, so a lot of talk, but no real evidence they're doing it.
Yep.
Okay, so now we move into my more dumb questions. So, in terms of like countermeasures, first off, can you really stop a drone from hitting your train? Do you put machine guns on it? Like, I mean, the Russians do have like defenses that they put on their trains, but it's a much more like Soviet style thinking, old fashioned thinking of like there are going to be guys waiting in the woods to blow up the tracks on and ambush the train type stuff, right? But do they have countermeasures for drones, or it's not really possible, or what do you think?
That's actually a very good question. Absolutely not a dumb question. I would give it to Erlend. I have to think about it for a second. What do you think? What's your thought, Erlend?
I mean, you can definitely put EW systems, etc., on the trains, just like we see that they do on trucks and cars and armored vehicles. But as we've seen and observed that they've put various jamming systems on their vehicles, we've still seen them being blown up by drones, right? So I guess, yeah, that you could probably have some more success if you layer your defenses on the train with both jamming systems and kinetic interception measures like machine guns and shotguns or whatever. But I don't know, like either you need some sort of automated systems on a specific cart on the train, or you would need to man those kinetic systems, and I think that sounds very improbable and not reliable. So I think they're fucked, if you know.
Okay, so on paper, what I'm hearing is like on paper you could do it, but it's not really practical, even with a lot of resources, and Russia doesn't really have the resources. But maybe you'd have a big net tube that protects your train. You'd have like EW stations like along the train tracks. You'd maybe have your own drones patrolling the tracks. You know, you would have machine guns on the train. You could do some stuff, but it would not never be airtight, and the Russians don't really have the resources to do that, I assume. So I guess
and another thing that we've seen more Russian videos of them intercepting Ukrainian drones, right? With drones, but it's nowhere near the same amount as the Ukrainians are doing. And even if the Russians would like to do that more, they have one big problem. They don't have counter UAS radar capabilities. So the Russians have a bunch of different radar systems, but they are not tuned and optimized to discover these drones. And as not Artois, but as Vincent explained in his podcast about Russian drones and Ukrainian drones and counter UAS systems used by both sides. Russian radar systems have basically been built to avoid detecting birds, for instance, and that they put certain limitations into the system so that they wouldn't discover slow-moving targets and small targets, because they probably had some problems with birds at some point when they were developing these radars. So that they don't really have the counter UAS radar capabilities that are needed, and if they start doing some developments now, that may, of course, be enhanced over time, but that's going to take a long time. And yeah, we're never going to see the Russians being able to intercept as many drones as the Ukrainians are doing with other drones.
Okay, my final dumbest question. So, it's actually historically been pretty difficult to, sabotage trains unless you have pretty sophisticated equipment. You've outlined the technical problems behind that pretty well. As far as I know, the NATO solution has always been like, we're just going to hit the depots with big missiles. Like, that's our plan, man. Because it's pretty hard to rebuild the depots. You have to have depots. So that's a good plan. Hitting the trains themselves is pretty difficult, right? Is my point. But the other issue is you can't just knock out a track because, as you said, they have very good engineering units that can respond to that. And basically they run an electrical signal through the train tracks. So they know, if you blow up a train track, they pretty immediately know that it's been done, right? So you basically have to hit the train itself or the depot. You can't really destroy the tracks and expect to really hurt anything. My question... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, critical infrastructure, of course, like bridges, tunnels, as we said, this kind of
Right. Yeah, tunnel would be good. That's a good point. It would take a lot of explosive power, obviously, but you're right. But so I guess my final question is what about putting mines on the train tracks, or is there some other way to not necessarily blow up the train, but disrupt the train network with drones, right? That's kind of what I'm thinking about now.
If you have resistance groups, of course, you need people to be there. This is a bit like the partisan stuff that happened probably in the Second World War and when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. You had a lot of this partisan activity, and that's what you're saying reminds me of. If you have an organization, for example, Artesh, Ukrainian resistance in the occupied areas, of course, if you have just human beings there, those railway lines are not kind of protected in the way that you have access to it. You can just walk there, and of course, if you probably, what do you think, Erlend? If you have some, I don't know, some classic TM62 anti-tank mines ready, put them on the tracks, and maybe have a device to blow them up timely when the train arrives or something. This would probably work, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, it's. I don't think you need mines. You just need remote detonated explosives at this point. And, mining train tracks is probably very hard, especially with drones. And another thing is
what I'm hearing is you basically would need people on nearby that would watch for the train. It has to be. It's like that. The timing window's that critical. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and another thing is that to place the mine directly on a train track is probably not very reliable, especially from a drone. So at this point, I think it's better to just park like a kamikaze drone, basically, a drone on the train track, and then blow it up when the train arrives. But if you can do that, you can also bomb the train while it's moving, right? So
Yeah, and the problem with the kamikaze is like we see that kind of tactic not related to trains, but often you have drones hanging out on the road and they wait until some vehicles or Russians with motorcycles pass, and then they suddenly get active, and then you need a battery for that they have to wait. And of course, if you are in this deep area, you can't like wait until like very long, having the like drones sitting around, I would say.
yeah,
You
you
can
need
start
to
using
time the
those-
you need
Go
to
ahead.
time the operation. Probably you do that with other surveillance drones, observing the trains when they depart from the station, and then launch the attack towards where you calculated that the train will be when you arrive, right? So
Yeah, that's the
it
path.
it needs coordination and intelligence, live intelligence, basically.
I mean, we know like from this like recent train strike from yesterday, but also from the other one, how long is it? Like not long ago, that when you have this kind of video footage, of course, then you have ISR there, and that's how the Ukrainians, work basically. First, you have the recon, and then you can work with your strike drones when you know the train is coming.
Yeah, and Ukraine obviously have some general intelligence about trains moving in certain areas, and they probably also are able to predict more or less when fuel transports are going to be arriving at certain stations or intersections, etc. But then to achieve the actual precision attack, you need live intelligence from the day of the attack. So that's why you see all these nice ISR drone footages of the drones from the drones that are flying.
Agree. And also like a very interesting factor, we are in the summer right now. You need also like a bit clear weather. Like this kind of ISR observation in the middle of the winter will probably be a bit harder, I would say, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, guys. Well, I hopefully asked some good questions for the audience about trains, because it's probably going to be the thing, our big train talk for a while, I assume. So yeah, it was a very good discussion. I thought the visual stuff was really helpful. As someone who doesn't, sometimes you guys show me a couple of pixels and you're like, don't you see that's like this type of tank and this, and I'm like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
But with the trains it's very clear, right? So that's hopefully for our audience too, it was very clear. So yeah, good job, guys. I think we should probably move to Q&A. We've got a lot of questions. We're already at 2 hours, so we'll start with the very first one. It's just about the relationship between Russia and Israel. It's odd. So I guess we won't get too deep into it, and too opinionated. We'll just stick with facts. But it is odd. I'd say it's driven by a couple of things. So number one, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a huge migration of Russian or former Soviet Jews to Israel. So there's a large population in Israel of Russian-speaking Jews. Number two, that itself and maybe other things translate to just generally the political view of Russia and Putin aren't in line with a lot of other European and American opinions on the matter. Putin is historically not as unpopular in Israel as he is in Europe and the United States. The other thing is that there was at least a sort of, I would say that even though Israel has found Russia's partnership with Iran to be problematic and troublesome, they've somehow sort of managed to compartmentalize that with their general working relationship with Russia. In other words, in the past, they made arrangements for like Syrian airspace. There were issues where like the Russians wouldn't shoot down the Israelis as long as the Israelis, kept their targeting. They notified the Russians of blah, blah, blah. So in other words, they came to like understandings historically. There's also a lot of business ties. The most two important areas, as far as I know, Standemir can probably speak more to this than me, but very briefly are the pharmaceutical industry. There's a lot of like dual citizens who work in the pharmaceutical industry and like go to Israel, get the latest developments in pharmaceutical tech, come back and bring it to Russia, make generics and stuff like that. The other is weapons industry. Russia historically has been a big buyer of things in the Israeli arms market that they consider good. A lot of the early Russian drones were based on Israeli tech and they sold. So historically they've been I don't know, like they're not friends. I think it would be a bit of a stretch to call them friends, but they don't want to be enemies. Neither of them, I would say that's the most accurate way to put it. Neither of them want to be enemies with each other. I think that it seems like, though, that Israel's taking a much harder line on Iran now. Russia either is definitely losing face. Their strategic partnership with Iran is showing to not mean much when the chips are down. So, if you're a future person who wants to have a relationship with Russia, you're going to look at that and go, well, do they really help you when you need it? But I think probably hasn't been much change. I think the fact remains that politically neither of them want to be enemies with each other. Anyone want to say anything about the Russia-Israel relationship?
I would add that a lot of the people who fled Russia with a lot of money are now in Israel.
Yeah.
So the disgraced oligarchs.
Yeah, so it's an interesting relationship, definitely odd. I would agree with the original questioner. It's an odd relationship, but they make it work, I guess. Let's see. So yeah, just some comments about what we were talking about.
There was a few questions about the Magnitsky Act and if it affects investment into Russian economy, foreign investment. So maybe Standemir, if you have any comments about that.
I mean, the thing that right now is affecting foreign investments the most in Russia is the fact that things are getting nationalized, and if you want to get out of Russia, you have to pay 90 or 85 or 95% of the money you earn from selling the business back to the Russian government. So no one wants to participate in that. And without also any, like I said, without any legal guarantees that your investment is going to be with you and is going to be protected, investment isn't happening at all, even before that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good answer. Were there more economy questions? Yeah, there were some questions about farmers, right? What was that again? One sec.
So there's one question in terms of oil prices going up, will it help Russia? If I remember last week, Standemir, we answered a similar question. You basically said that the oil prices going up should help Russia in theory, but the strong ruble is really like eating into that help that it's providing. Is that right?
Yeah, they really want to lower the ruble to somewhere around 100 rubles per dollar. That's their goal now. It used to be the dreaded figure. Now it's the goal.
Yeah, so it should help them in theory, but in practice it's not because the ruble's too strong. So that's kind of part of what that perfect storm that guy was talking about at that conference, right? He said like strong ruble, low energy prices. I don't think he mentioned the war, but that's another thing in the storm. That's what he meant by perfect storm. There's just all these different things contributing to this crappy situation for them.
He technically mentioned the war. He said that people should be more modest in their desires, so not as much defense spending. Yeah, that's his sort of way to say we can't handle the spending anymore.
Yeah. So then, as Erlend said, there was some stuff about farming. Basically, what's the state of Russian farming currently? Are like agricultural firms shutting down? Are employees leaving the sector? Are they? Yeah, that's basically the question.
Well, employees aren't leaving the sector more that they're not being let in because a lot of the work was done by migrant workers. So the employees that they were relying on are now still in Uzbekistan. They're not coming over, or in Tajikistan. In terms of the agriculture as a whole, for the Russian south, the southwestern part of Russia, it's been 3 years of bad weather. So some of the farms are just completely devastated, especially if you're in fruits and berries, you've been crushed. If you're in wheat, again, like I said, their exports are falling because the export duty is high, and also the Russian ruble is strong. And right now the wheat price is low, so they expect less exports. And if there's one sector of the Russian agriculture sector that's growing, it's pork exports. They've managed to acquire new markets and they're exporting pork from Russia. They're building several new facilities just to breed pigs and then render them. Now, as a whole, if I want to point to one data point that shows how bad things are in Russian agriculture when it comes to crops, Rostelmash, which is the Russian domestic producer of agricultural equipment, in April had to fire 2,000 people because of low sales and a buildup of inventory. That wasn't heard of until now. So that's how bad things are.
Yeah, thanks, Tanner. So a good answer. So Erlend, what's the next question?
Well, there were some questions about the trains, and yeah, if the train stops, it's easier to hit the cars. Yes, of course it is. And if we were to expect that trains would be continue while on fire after being hit in the future, and I don't think so, because it would be incredibly dangerous for the operator of the trains, right? So there could be orders given by some officials about continuing to drive the train even if they're hit by drones, but
if I saw in that video, they showed people running out of the train, right?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the locomotive operator that they left there.
That's what I'd do.
Yeah,
that's what I would do.
I wanted to compare it to what Morten said a couple of weeks ago on the stream, like the F-16 pilot, that you can order to do as much as you want certain things, but someone is going to have to fly the plane that has been repaired poorly, and it's not going to happen. And I think the same applies to this, right? You can order the train operators to not stop while being attacked by drones as much as you want. It's just not going to happen.
I mean, your life is in danger in that moment,
They're just going to, yeah. So, yeah. When the train is hit by a drone and fuel explodes and erupts in fire, the train is going to stop.
So someone mentioned that they heard this week that the Russians are eating things they shouldn't. Yeah, so that's a reference to a tape that was released by Hur. Hur does that quite frequently. They just sort of they release to the public phone calls between Russians and usually like their loved ones back in Russia. This one was notable because he basically mentioned that he ate a person. I assumed it was I actually didn't really follow it beyond that. That's all I heard about it. But I assume it was because the supply situation was bad. They didn't just randomly eat a person, although they did let an actual person who ate a person for fun back into the Russian army from prison. So maybe he did just eat him for fun, and maybe people do just do that in the Russian military. But that aside, I assume it was because they didn't have any food, so they ate a person. But yeah, I think overall, obviously, that's a crazy story. It definitely doesn't speak to good conditions in the Russian military, but we're just kind of, I think, beyond the Russian military being dysfunctional at this point. And I'm not sure it's indicative at scale of any serious supply problems in the Russian military. I mean, not good, but there's, this trench might not have any supplies, and the next trench over might have too many or whatever. Like you don't want to take one anecdote and assume it's indicative of the whole situation. That said, crazy story. Wouldn't want to be the guy who got eaten. Erlend,
It's
do you
like
want to say anything?
it's like the donkeys, right? We saw maybe 5 verified videos of donkeys being used at the front lines, and then everyone is saying that the Russian army is now run out of cars because they're using donkeys, right? So
Yeah, like I don't want to like say that it didn't happen or that it's not important, but I also think that sometimes, like you were saying with the donkeys, people get the wrong idea because they see 5 videos and everyone talks about it, and because it feels fun to score points on the Russian army being stupid for a minute, that then everyone starts thinking, oh, they use donkeys all the time, and it's like, I'm just maybe pushing back against that a little bit. Not everybody's cannibals, I don't think, but obviously not good when your army is to some degree resorting to to cannibalism.
yeah,
On the donkey side, there's also the thing that Russia doesn't breed that many donkeys. They're very cheap, but they don't breed a lot of them. They breed horses in several regions which have equestrian traditions. Like they breed amazing horses in Yakutia that can stay outside in minus, I think, 60 or 70 degrees, and it'll be okay. But they don't breed that many donkeys.
The state's going to collectivize my donkey anyway. I might as well just slaughter it and have a feast, right?
the thing is, traditionally back in the time, donkeys were used extensively in army logistics because they're super easy to let's say operate for a person that has no knowledge. You just feed it and the donkey will just follow you basically. I think with horses it's a little bit different. You need a lot more competent personnel, and you need to take a lot better care of the horse. And unfortunately, a lot of donkeys traditionally they've been expendable animals in armies around the world for thousands of years. So I don't think being an army donkey is very nice. But yeah, we definitely saw the Russians use donkeys, but not that much. So we cannot say that the Russian army is now basically relying on donkeys. That's not true. But I saw Kellen and some other people also were interested in like this whole Iran situation and how it can affect the oil prices. And there are especially 2 things, and also other things that are more related to Ukraine. But I think we can start with the oil prices. So China has a very heavy reliance on Iranian oil. I think it's around 20% of China's oil coming from Iran or via Iran. And yeah, I would say that China does have an interest to prevent the closing of the Hormuz Strait. But on the other hand, I think China also doesn't want to interfere too much with what is happening between the US and Iran right now. I just have a feeling that they rather keep away from that for a while at least. What are your thoughts, Joseph and Stanimir?
Yeah, that's my general impression, is that as far as I remember, the Chinese Iran has offered China like no less than twice, maybe more than that, like discounted oil that they could stockpile, and China's basically turned them down. In other words, Iran has proposed relying increasingly more on Iranian oil, and China has said no thanks. And to me, that implies that the Chinese are worried about overdependence on Iran. They want to get like oil from different sources, and B, that they're relatively confident that like the energy market is going to stay kind of low for a while. Like they're not worried about a big spike in energy prices anytime soon. So they're not like, oh my God, we should buy oil cheap now and stockpile it, right? So that's my general impression, is that they do have an interest, but they're not actively worried about like energy prices at the moment. Definitely though, if energy prices get too high, like it's bad for China. So if the equation changed significantly, maybe they would start worrying and doing something. But for now, as Erlend said, I think they're more interested in measuring U.S. responses and applying that kind of to their own situation, and kind of waiting things out. And they feel like they're in a pretty good position right now in terms of like how the world economy is shaping up and where they sit in that equation. I think overall they're pretty comfortable.
Yeah, just for context, the Hormuz Gap or Strait is between Iran and the Arabic states, both the Emirates, Dubai, Qatar. Is basically a choke point where Iran traditionally has threatened to stop transit and also tried it in the past. They, to some degree of success, have managed to halt transportation of oil from several of the Arabic states, and there's a lot of oil being transported through that strait. So Iran is now again threatening to close this strait. So that's why we're talking about this.
And something to add that I saw that isn't mentioned as much, despite the spike in oil prices, Iran has been pumping oil at a high rate, 2.2 million barrels a day for the last week. So Iran's oil exports haven't been hit. What Israel has hit is refining capacity and not actual oil export.
Yeah, so my general impression is China would probably try and stay out of this. So we'll see. The next question related to Iran is from Kellen. Do you have any clarity on whether Russia can produce Shaheds 100% on its own without Iran's help? I heard conflicting reports. I think Stanimir has some info about this, but what I know is that they've at least increased their capabilities for producing what they call the Geran drone and other variants of the Shaheds quite drastically.
I'm probably not the best person to say this, but I think they can produce enough domestically, enough of the parts of it. But I haven't looked into it for a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. We have a video on the channel of me and John Ridge going through the documentation of the Shaheds, like the agreement between Iran and Russia in terms of how it's produced and all that. And basically it's like, we'll give you a big pile of gold if you can show us how to make Shaheds. The point being that all indications from the agreement were that Iran was supposed to teach Russia how to do it on their own. It wasn't that like Iran would have extended advisory capacity in that regard. They did show Russia, it looks like they had like supervisors go over and show them how to do everything, but at this point they can basically do it on their own. They're not super complicated to make. They rely mostly on students who have like really shitty internships. Like imagine you're just a student at a Russian university one day and they tell you you have to go work at a factory for like peanuts on the dollar to build drones and you might get bombed. So yeah, that's like, and they rely also on African laborers that they traffic in to commit war crimes. So that's their labor force. It's not the most skilled labor force. There's a few like skilled supervisors, but it's mostly like work that you can automate it, but to automate it costs like millions and millions of US dollars. So it's easier to just get some low skilled. If you want to scale up fast and temporarily, it's easier to just get a bunch of really cheap laborers like interns and African migrants to just come in and do all the work for you. So yeah, my general impression is they can do it on their own. They probably don't need Iran at this point. And yeah, but the general trend is there's a lot of technical knowledge being shared right now, right? In other words, North Korea now has a drone program, and it's probably a viable one because they're getting all this information from Russia. Originally, the North Korean missiles that Russia launched were said to be a complete joke. They were terrible. They didn't hit their targets. Some of them just blew up in the sky. The new ones, the ones that they've sent after making adjustments, are supposedly much better. They are much more accurate and much more deadly. So it's a dangerous trend. We're seeing all of these different countries that are interested in doing all this stuff, sharing information and technology. So far, China hasn't gotten in on it, but Iran, North Korea, and Russia are very much sharing missile and drone technology at a very alarming rate. I would say most of it's flowing out of Russia for now. I don't think Iran and North Korea are teaching them very much. But in exchange, Russia is getting a lot of equipment. They're getting missiles, they're getting drones, they're getting artillery shells. They're even getting soldiers in the case of North Korea. So, that's to me, that's the more alarming trend. And it's not a question of whether Russia needs Iran to produce Shaheds. It probably doesn't. But the long-term big picture here is all of these countries have active agreements to share technology on drones, and they're all working towards building more sophisticated and deadly drones. So it's something that Europe should definitely take notice of. The US should definitely take notice of and act accordingly and start taking drones much more seriously.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note that Russia's ability to develop and, of course, further develop, improve the Shahed drone concept is vastly superior to what Iran can do. The thing is that Russia needed something that worked now, back in 2022, right? So that's why they went to the Iranians to get the Shahed drone in the first place. But now, as they have their own production, they've done various iterations and modifications to these drones that has made them a lot more dangerous and more difficult to intercept. So I wouldn't emphasize too much on Russia's reliance on Iran in this case and this capability. I think Russia can probably, if there are some parts that they've been receiving from Iran, unfortunately, I think Russia can make them even better on their own, or maybe get something from China. So.
Yeah, I think it's a subtle difference, but I think the difference between Iran and Russia is Iran was locked out of the US financial system at a time, and also they're a much smaller country, when like the US really could exert pressure on Iran. In other words, the sanctions regime on Iran was pretty tough, and as a result, Iran spent a lot of time and energy on completely building their own indigenous capacity to do drones. They've always been interested in drones since like the 80s. Even in the 80s, they were doing weird drone stuff. But they, because of the sanctions, and they're clever country, like they have good scientists and stuff. They focused a lot on replicating the technology they needed to completely build a Shahed like by themselves. And that was, I think, their crowning achievement, that they managed to do this without any Western components, or at least not very many Western components. The ones that they needed were very small and easy to smuggle. And they managed to build this, viable piece of technology. But as Erlend said, it's not that good. That was their real accomplishment, doing this completely outside of the US, or the global, I should say, economic system. The Russians, on the other hand, are different. Like they're basically like stealing as many pieces of technology and machinery as they possibly can to keep their economy going. They're not interested. I'd say they're interested in developing their own indigenous capacity, but they don't seem to be as like capable as Iran at doing that. So now they're trying to just improve the Shahed with the technology they have. Like they were able to take Iran's accomplishment of building that drone without Western components, and now they are able to apply their own technology base to it and their own approach, which is a lot of like stealing and adapting old like Soviet stuff to the Shahed. And as Erlend said, they've made it a much more capable platform than Iran ever did. And that's probably now going to go, a lot of that information is going to go back to Iran. So now they both have that information, right?
Yeah, that's the worrying part. So one more Iran question. I think we're going to wrap it up here. But if the Iranian regime breaks, would this be the best possible geopolitical scenario for Ukraine? I don't think so, because it will divert a lot of attention away from Ukraine. So every time we see something major happen in in another country, and especially one where there is a lot of Western interest, especially interest that there is no instability or civil wars breaking out. We tend to see a lot of attention diverted away from Ukraine, which is, of course, negative for Ukraine. And in this case, Iran is a much larger country with 90 million plus inhabitants than Syria, which was, for the last 14 years, people had been fleeing away from Syria. And Palestine also doesn't have nearly the same amount of inhabitants or geopolitical importance as Iran does. And if Iran breaks, there is a non-zero chance that there will be massive amount of instability and possibly even some sort of civil war or regional war. And that would, in my opinion, be very negative for Ukraine.
Yeah, I basically agree. I don't really see us, like you said, the Syria thing was manageable. It's very obvious Ukraine felt that they had an interest in that. I think that's kind of beyond dispute because their special forces were directly involved in helping the resistance. But in that case, it seems like they had a much more, like Putin had definitely actively tied his legitimacy or prestige to the Assad regime, and toppling it had like a very tangible effect for Russian influence in the region. Like they had a military base there. There's a lot of reasons why that was really critical. I'm not sure that Iran has the same. It's definitely like I was just making the case that Russia and Iran are cooperating, so it feels weird now to be like they're not really cooperating. But like in terms of they're aligned together, but they're not. Yeah, I don't know. It's not directly good for Ukraine. It's probably bad for Russia. It's probably good for like other countries besides Ukraine. But as Erlend said, it would be mostly distracting and mostly a destabilizing force in the world that would distract and cause problems for Ukraine, I think. But I don't know. There's like a very small possibility that in the long term it could be good, but in the short to medium term, probably bad.
Yeah, there's definitely a possibility that if the regime in Iran is toppled and we see some new regime taking place that is not interested in cooperating with Russia, but rather with the West, then of course that's negative for Russia in the long term. But the possibility that that will happen, in my opinion, at least in the short term, is very low. Almost, I see it as almost improbable right now. There's a lot of hope. And I hope personally, of course, myself, that the priest regime falls and good people take over and the people will be empowered, But personally, I don't think that is very realistic. I hope I'm wrong, of course.
Yeah, I basically have similar sentiments. I spent a lot of time in my academic career studying Tajikistan, which is a weird country that speaks Iranian, Persian, Farsi, but they write it in Russian alphabet and they use a bunch of Russian words. So I have a weird affinity towards Iran and Russian things and stuff like that. Yeah, it's so I personally I want to see, as Erlend said, the mullahs toppled. There's definitely a lot of very deep, old ties between Russia and Iran. And in this case, there's like a negative alignment that's happening that I already mentioned. But so, yeah, we would like to see people in Iran have more freedom. But in terms of directly helping Ukraine in the short term, probably not the case if we're being very cold and analytical about it. So yeah, I think that's all the questions, Erlend. Any final stuff before we wrap up? Is there anything going on with the website or projects we're doing that we should let the folks know about?
There's nothing new on the website right now, but there is something very interesting coming up soon, I think. So I can't really speak about it more than that it's coming up, and it's gonna be very, very. It's not nice. It's a pretty horrendous thing that is being documented, but there will be some interesting documentation, which I hope will put more attention towards Russian war crimes. So that's coming up soon, I hope, on the website. But yeah, there's a group working hard on that.
Cool. Well, everyone should stay appraised of our website, Tochnyi.info. Check it out and see if it updates soon, like Erlend said it will. So then the other thing was that probably on Wednesday we'll release a video, as we mentioned. Stanimir will discuss Putin's wacky remarks about Russian feet at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. As we said, Putin made some remarks, but they weren't very economic in nature. So we're gonna have that as like a separate discussion. So yeah, check that out. It should be on the channel around Wednesday. Cool. So I think that wraps it up for us. I want to thank, of course, our panel for showing up today. Definitely a lot of great content for the audience, a lot of different topics. So thanks, guys, for coming and sharing all your varied expertises and enlightening our audience. Gao always makes me thank myself, so I'll do that now. Then, of course, I want to thank our chat who asked some great questions. We always appreciate you guys asking your questions. We don't have to do this live. We could do some kind of pre-recorded thing, but we like hanging out with each other, first off, but we also like having you guys around to ask us questions and give us feedback about what's going on. So yeah, thanks for, I wouldn't have even talked about Russian cannibalism today if it wasn't for you guys. So thanks so much to our live chat. Of course, not everyone can make the live chat, so thanks everyone else who tunes in after the fact. You guys are welcome to leave stuff in the comments if you have any questions or comments for us. We do read all your comments, and we appreciate your feedback and your questions. So yeah, thanks to our audience, and yeah, we'll see everyone next week. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
On behalf of the brave.